Do people know that story? What happened?
Say it again.
I'll say it again. What happened was that I was on Any Questions down in Wales, and before they start the programme, there's a warm-up question, and someone asked the question. I was on with Grant Shapps, the Tory minister. He'd just flown down there in his aeroplane. He'd literally flown down in his aeroplane. Anyway, and the question was ashes to ashes. What would you do if you could go back in time to the 70s or to the 80s to improve the world? First of all, the rest of the panel didn't know what ashes to ashes was, so I had to explain it to them as an avid watcher of TV, of course. And everyone was silent, so I said, well, actually, I'd most probably go back and assassinate Thatcher. And what happened was, and it was a genuine joke. It was a joke. What I should have said is sectioned her. That would have been and what happened was that literally I got a standing ovation. And we were on air in 30 seconds, and they had to calm people down before we went on air. And that was it. When I went to the GMB conference, someone raised it, and I repeated the joke, and it was on national TV that night. And it was in the middle of the leadership election campaign for nominations. By the time I got back to London on the train, the TV cameras were all there and all the rest of it. Diane Abbott called for me to stand down, which I thought was really comradely. Really comradely. And bizarrely enough, and we were a bit short of nominations, but that night we had the biggest rush of nominations that we had for the whole campaign. It was bizarre. And I had all sorts of people writing to me saying wonderful and all the rest, but I had little old ladies and a few colonels in Surrey who wrote to me who were really upset. So I said, I'm really sorry if it's upset anyone. It was a joke in bad taste and all the rest of it. And then I did get a lieutenant colonel then write to me saying, good man. promoted later. Anyway, that was it. And these things happen, but it just shows you the vehemence of that there was about the Thatcher period, to be honest, to get that sort of thing, in, especially, I suppose, in Wales with Closure of the Mines. I've been doing the tour of the conferences and speaking at the various conferences, and Bridlington Bakers yesterday, GMB manufacturing sector today. So I'm sort of ranted out. I don't want to rant anymore, and I just want to make a few comments on what people have said, if that's right, to start the discussion off. In Hayes now, we don't sit like this, we sit in a circle. It's part of our experience in climate camp, but it's also that in Hayes you can't turn your back on anyone either. But we sit in a circle, have a proper discussion, so let's have a proper discussion. I just want to put the situation for me at the moment, what I've been doing at meeting after meeting, people have heard me ad nauseum, is to describe exactly what Dot has said, what it's like in Parliament at the moment as they deconstruct and dismantle the welfare state. And I've been trying to make sure people are aware of the seriousness of each piece of legislation and how that contributes. And it literally is every section now of the welfare state for the last 18 months and this now planned for the coming period. Virtually every section now is almost dismantled or on the precipice of being, with the legislation in place, being pushed into the abyss itself. The latest one on the Queen's Speech, on the pensions thing, as you know. In this Queen's Speech, we've got two pensions bills proposed. One is the implementation of the supposed imposed deal for the public sector pensions, which is interesting because they've got to get that legislation through, and it relates to Steve's point really, because the issue on the day in November was to try and get the Labour front bench to come out in support of the industrial action and against the pension supposed reforms that the Tory government is pushing through. So one of the key issues now is when that legislation is put up, whether the Labour front bench will fully oppose it. And we haven't got that commitment yet, because obviously some of these reforms were based upon what they wanted to do as well. So part of our job as an LRC in these coming weeks is to try and get the Labour front bench to actually now completely oppose that legislation. We'll be putting messages out through the LRC and elsewhere about the actions we're going to take to try and get that firmed up. I'm confident we can, but it's going to require some pressure over the next month or so. The other element is the state pension reforms as well that they're introducing. And what's interesting in that, what they're proposing, is not 68, it's actually flexible retirement, so work till you drop. And interestingly enough, it looks as though, and this breaks the deal, the GMB needs to be aware of it, it looks as though they've linked the bill that reforms the public sector pensions to the state pension bill, which means the 68 deal now gets broken as well. So you could be in a situation where both in terms of the state pension and on the public sector individual pension schemes, the retirement age will no longer be, as they're planning, raised to 68, but could be raised higher. So flexible, yeah. To be frank with you, if there, you get to ludicrous examples here, but we're having I work with the FBU, we're having negotiations at the moment on the FBU, trying to prevent it because the Tories want to push the retirement age to 60 for firefighters, rather than the 50 or 55 that we're negotiating around at the moment. And again, if you look at the nature of the jobs that people are doing, to be frank with you, I do not want a 60-year-old firefighter coming up that ladder to throw me over their shoulder and rescue me in a fire. I just don't want it. I can't see it. It's the same with teachers. If it is to 68, I think it's a crippling burden on people. But actually, if this opens that deal up as well, and we're pushing to 70 and beyond, this is insanity, quite honestly. But that's in the written details of the legislation now proposed. And it just goes on and on. And the point I made, just to comment on what's been said so far, really, the interesting thing in all the discussions we're having now is people are reliving their experiences of the welfare state. And there's an increasing understanding now, what Dot has said, about the nature of the welfare state as well. Now, the debate we used to have about the welfare state, from the left and right, if you like, is the welfare state was introduced by a Labour government. And the argument then was, how far has it gone? Because you could argue that the welfare state was simply there to stabilise capitalism, to create a compliant workforce that could then be exploited. That was the argument from the left. So the argument from the left, which developed in the 70s and 80s, and I was part of the In and Against the State group, is the state isn't a set of institutions, it's a relationship. It's a relationship of power. So in other words, it can be used to dominate people, or it can be used in working class hands to dominate the system. And many of us argue that if you go in and against the state, so you change the state form from one of dominance and, I suppose, utility and exploitation into one in which actually you can give people power to shape the future of their lives in society. And that was the tussle between the left and right the way up until the recent period. The tragedy that we've got now is that literally we're in a situation where there'll be nothing left within the next 18 months to 2 years if we don't do anything about it. Because when Thatcher came out with that argument, there's no such thing as society, well, Thatcher's children, Cameron and Clegg, believe there's no such thing as the state, and there shouldn't be any such thing as the state. And the only elements of society that will exist in the future will be the individuals and the companies and corporations, and the link will be not some common bond of humanity as we try and create in society, but it will be a cash nexus, what you can pay for and what you can buy. And it will be literally, not knowing the value of everything, but everything having a price. And I think that's the society that they're on the edge of creating if we're not careful. So what do we do about it? Well, it's exactly as is happening here, really, which is be disciplined. Which is, I genuinely think now that it's about building up a climate of resistance which topples a government. Now, it might sound almost impractical or unreal at the moment, but things happen like this. I think you build up such a climate of resistance that there's so much resistance in every walk of life, you actually then destabilise a government. And in that way, it collapses. Governments usually don't, governments implode normally. That's what usually happens. But they implode as a result of being confronted on a daily basis at every level by every part of society coming out. And I think that's beginning to happen. And it might, everywhere, it might be me, but everywhere I go now, there's some form of demonstration breaking out, large or small, or even just individual acts of saying, I'm not willing to take it anymore. And if you look at what's happened in the last couple of years, Dot and I have been around a long while. We've been in campaigns over the years and all the rest of it. But since November 10, basically, it's been unbelievable. On a scale, people have golden eras and all the rest of it. We were about in the 80s, actually. It wasn't a golden era. Yes, we had the miners' strike and all the rest of it. but it was very isolating on lots of periods. Isolating and divisions occurred within the movement itself. And actually, the movement, to a certain extent, even though there was some large amount of support in wider society, the movement didn't develop on other elements of social movements developed at that point in time. So actually, this is most probably the most creative period in the history of the labour movement and wider society that we've had, most probably since 45, actually. And so I just think now, each of us now have to have a discussion about what we can play in creating this climate of resistance. DPAC and Black Triangle, we've now got a disability movement that we've never had before. We've had disability charities, and that's what we've got. We've got the professional sector, if you like, that are there. But we've never had a movement on the march in the disability movement. Well, on a small scale we did for a short period in the early 90s, but didn't last long. DPAC and Black Triangle actually are now an in-your-face movement that is incredibly successful. This bit about shutting down Trafalgar Square wasn't just Trafalgar Square, it's Oxford Circus and Crossing, isn't it really? It's just on a regular basis, you know. And even though it doesn't get an awful lot of coverage, what's happening is word of mouth is actually making it move and all the rest. Black Triangle, in one day, closed every Atos office in Scotland. Shut them all down. Shut them all down. We're now running a campaign with Black Triangle and others for those doctors who are doing the assessments who, quite honestly, we feel are criminalising people as a result of the assessments that they're doing. So therefore, are social criminals themselves. And actually, to get the BMA to actually come out and actually condemn the assessments themselves is a fantastic breakthrough for the disability campaign. And it goes on and it goes on. And I just think now also, you know, the student movement itself is in a relatively quiet period at the moment. But if you look at what they've done over the last 18 months to 2 years, it's just been phenomenal. And that was the generation who we all thought were just into becoming accountants and lawyers, and that was it. And then all of a sudden, they turn up in November the 10th in their numbers, kick the hell out of Millbank and all the rest of it, but at the same time then mobilise and don't go away. And to be honest, the amount of repression that's gone on against young people, and nevertheless people are still turning up. You know, the Right to Protest campaign has been a phenomenal success. We've just had the Hilliard brothers win their case. Alfie Meadows goes to court, he's been beaten up by the police, they prosecute him, he goes to court this time round, the jury can't decide, he's back in court in the autumn, I think we'll win at that stage as well. But what's happening, Xenon in Brighton has now come out as a result of local people campaigning, he's been reinstated at university. So what's happening in the student movement, despite all that pressure, as a result of them mobilising on the right to work, the right to protest campaign, etc., and then coming back again, they're still up for it. I've been doing meetings at universities around the country, and people are still up for it, still want to get out. Almost, I have to say, almost sometimes despite the NUS leadership, and are willing to come and have a go. In terms of the trade union movement at the moment, we've had more industrial action over the last 2 years than we've had for 2 decades. There's been elements within the trade union movement that are trying to close that down and kill it off as best they can. I work for the TUC, I'm an ex-TUC bureaucrat. I'm trained in the methods. I can organise meetings where no one turns up. I can organise demonstrations and get the placards ready and all the rest of it, where we can march down streets where no one can see us. You know, that's the whole training that you get as a trade union bureaucrat in that period. Now, actually, even in the most reactionary unions, people are getting up and saying we've had enough. But what's interesting about that is we're coordinating the industrial action on the scale now we've never seen before. Now, we went through the pensions dispute, we got large numbers out, and it's been difficult and all the rest of it, but people are now mobilising for the autumn again for coordinated industrial action. UCU took that decision at the weekend, I spoke on a fringe at the conference, NUT have taken the same decision, PCS now have taken guerrilla action in a whole series of confrontations and then building up to June and then to the autumn as well. So we've got coordinated action on a scale we've not seen for a long period of time. And Dot says about the pensioners movement itself. For the first time now, what we've got is the pensioners movement, no longer just a single isolated campaign, thanks to the work that Dot and others have done, linking on a cross-generational basis, so that they're mobilising much wider now in terms of not a single issue campaign, but a campaign that recognises that it's a linked with all the other issues themselves. And I just think there's that potential there now. And it just needs determination, courage, solidarity, but it also does need discussions like this about how can you contribute as an individual to that destabilisation of this government. How can you create to that climate of resistance, either as an individual, or then as an individual, what organisation you're in, and what skill you've got that you can bring to the table, what actually attribute that you've got that contribute towards the resistance movement. And it can be, I say to people, you sing resistance. If you can paint resistance. If you can know skills like me, just march or demonstrate or whatever. On the stop, I just give you the example of the climate campaign that we had around the third runway, and we've got the Rio conference this weekend as well. We had one bloke who was just trained up in his form of resistance was super gluing himself to ministers. Walking up, and he did it to Gordon Brown. Shake hands, that was it. I just thought it was the most creative forms of resistance I've seen. Got us a lot of publicity around the issue. So I think what I'm saying is the seriousness of the situation over this next 2 years is absolutely critical. The issue around the welfare state is, I think, is people are becoming alert to. But finally, I think just to have confidence now in this coming period, you've got to have confidence that we can bring down this government. Then the debate opens about what we can replace it with. And I think that's going to be important debates we're going to have on the picket lines and in the occupations, on the demonstrations. Because I don't want to go back to New Labour. No. I want that debate around the welfare state and in and against the state and the form of socialism that we want. Solidarity.